What's up there, workforce? Chris here.
Brian here.
And it is time to talk about Final Fantasy 16, or is it Final Fantasy 14 7.0? What is 16? What is this stuff from Yoshi P? This is entirely speculation. We have very little to no confirmed facts here.
Yeah,
So
Yoshi P himself says, wait for an announcement.
so we
Please.
don't typically jump on the far distant hype trains. We don't typically jump on the hype around just total and blatant speculation. But this is big enough news, and it's fun to talk about. And I don't think there's enough information out there at this point that we're in danger of like spoiling anything, or that
Yeah.
we're in danger of getting it right or wrong. Like I think at this point it's just what would we want from the hypothetical 16, knowing that they are working on something.
Yeah, and that's what's really important about these rumors is that if you've been following along, we like what is known is that Yoshi P has been working on a project since 2016.
Mm-hmm.
They've been working to hire within the company, like bringing people into the project or outside to help work on this project. So we know that within his division, he is a director level. He's a head over all of Division 3, which basically encompasses Final Fantasy 11, Final Fantasy 14, other IP. I think some Dragon Quest 10. I think Dragon Quest 10 falls under him. So he has their multiplayer biggest franchise all under his lead. Yoshi P is also currently really known for his like salvation of Final Fantasy 14
Right.
and ultimately the Final Fantasy brand. A part of what they did with 2.0 was saving the brand Final Fantasy because people had lost that much trust in it that it was just like we basically we have to do something. And so
Right.
that's what they ultimately did. So typical debate, like Chris has brought this up before multiple times. We don't know if he's good at bringing up a game from scratch. Maybe he's just the best at saving a failed game. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. But in context of what would 16 be and what would we want it to be, we don't know that it's named 16, but it's just easy for us right now and every in the community to refer to it as 16 because 16 hasn't formally been announced.
Right.
16 could be a single player standalone game, or it could be a next MMO or online multiplayer game. There's like Yoshi P has multiple times praised Diablo,
Mm-hmm.
and so putting him in charge of a game, and that's kind of where the question is, Chris. Let's talk about 16 in the context of what is it and where do you think it fits in? Is it a continuation of 14? Is it its own IP? Gameplay wise, are we talking similar? Or are you thinking that he might go in a completely different direction from the MMO roots that his whole division is in charge of?
I mean, he's definitely expressed interest in the Diablo style dungeon crawler looter mindset, and
Mm-hmm.
there's been a lot of games that have spun off of that. And so we typically think of Diablo as kind of the Coca-Cola of the space, right? But there were ones before it, and there have been ones after it. Path of Exiles has had immense success.
Mm-hmm.
I've enjoyed Wilson. You're enjoying Minecraft Dungeons.
Oh
I mean,
yeah.
the list is on and on and on and on. But imagining a Final Fantasy like that is incredible. It's just hard to picture how he would have the time to dedicate to it. And then my concern with it entirely comes down to, is he good at bringing a game up from scratch? When you read things like Inc. magazine or Forbes magazine or whatever, you learn that there's a bunch of different companies at a bunch of different points, and it takes a different skill set to navigate them forward. And so there are people out there who are good at taking an idea and getting it off the ground. They're good at
Mm-hmm.
getting an initial workflow set up, getting the idea to realization, getting it to market, developing a client base from nothing, and all of that. And then that business hits 1 million, 10 million, whatever number, and it gets bigger than them, and it starts to need things like a little bit more like corporate, right? So you start to need to bring on things like stability for employees. You might need HR at that point. You might need bigger distribution centers, warehouses, franchising out over locations you can't physically touch anymore. And some CEOs don't shift well to that, and they're better off selling it for that 1 or 10 million or whatever their stake in it is, and then just going and starting another one than really staying there to damage that one. There's other people who are good at picking it up from there and carrying it on, or picking up a sick one from there and healing it and carrying it on. Everybody has their skill
Skill
set.
set. Mm-hmm.
And we know Yoshi P can take a large, unhealthy property and turn it into something incredible. That's just objectively proven by every measure of 14 success. The question is, can he do it if he's in an open sandbox, and can he build something out of nothing?
Mm-hmm. And so for me, I say that he absolutely has earned that opportunity.
Oh, sure.
I'm not going to sit here and worry about it. I've engaged, and I even posted a video, guys. You should go check it out, talking about this, and to a degree, a community feedback in which there are people who don't, or they're worried that Yoshi, like they're like, so for whatever reason, they don't feel he's doing good a job with Final Fantasy XIV. If that's news to you, just go read our comment section, and you might be horrified or enlightened in some, in some way of debate. But that all being said, is that if you actually go look at when, like when I talk with these individuals who don't think that Yoshi P is right for leading 14 or 16 or whatever else, the disillusionment starts with around 2016, 2017, when this new project started.
Mm-hmm.
I've been saying for years that it's like, he's the producer and director of 14. He's publicly stated, and we cover this on the channel, that he's still going to be involved with 14 for many years. I don't, he doesn't want to leave it. He loves it. Like, this is something that has just been really near and dear to his heart. But at the same time, he's also earned the right to make the game that he, like, he's definitely got this game that he's always wanted to make.
Yeah.
He gets put in this position. He does a great job. And it's like, oh man, I still want to make this kind of game. And so I think that if you go look at it, like anybody who's frustrated with maybe the content schedule and what's been happening with 14, it's like, note that like he's training up other people. He has to. It's right, and we should root for him and wish him success. And ultimately, whether he succeeds or fails, it's on him. But as a fan of his, as somebody who, like, once he released his first letter introducing himself to the 1.0 community, I go, I believe in this guy. Like, I'm gonna see what happens. And he's delivered. And I just know that they're probably working him like crazy. So the question is, for me, not that whatever he does, I think he's going to be successful, because he's also changed the culture within Square, which has allowed them to start actually, and you've seen it with Unreal coming for more games like Final Fantasy VII Remake. Like, you're seeing a culture shift, that when he talks about, like, there are people who won't let him do the API, and it's, you kind of have an old guard, and he's bringing up a whole new guard of what they're working to try and accomplish. And so it doesn't happen like a light switch. I think it just happens with more and more time. And the projects that he's been involved in, and the projects that have been started since he's, kind of helped to change things, have been wildly successful and really well received. And I think a lot of that has to do with just kind of his leadership and how we're going to change, and how development needs to change for a new 2020 mindset and beyond. So that all being said, that's kind of my technical, when I look at it and evaluate as a fly on the wall, or like as an outside observer from what I experience in dev. I want to talk about 16 specifically, and what kind of game it could be, and where it fits in overall. And my personal opinion, and Chris, I think we've disagreed on this numerous times, but my personal opinion of this is that I don't see within the 14 space. I've seen it a couple times with Crystal Chronicles, like for the DS and stuff like that, that looter style Final Fantasy game. I think that if you're going to introduce a new multiplayer game, whether it's an MMO or just a kind of Diablo, This Is Us, drop in, drop out multiplayer type game, there is a gap in that. And I think having it doesn't necessarily mean it's isometric, but essentially a Final Fantasy action RPG looter type game, that when you look at 11, 14, and then let's just say again 16, that overall fits in and complements that game. So let's say you're like, oh, you know what, you're just not feeling 14, you've got all your jobs at cap, and you're waiting for the next story patch and new dungeon and raid. And if you're a part of this Square Enix ecosystem, for like whether you're subbed or whatever, taking a break and going and then playing another Final Fantasy game, whether that's 11 or Dragon Quest 10, or it turns out like you really love that RPG and that looter aspect, and it turns out, hey, it's easy for Chris or your friends, like, hey, I see that they're in 14. Oh, you guys are finished your raid. Hey, I'm over here grinding it out and playing 16, and then you can just pop in and join me. It keeps that community together. So it ends up saying like, hey, it's, instead of looking at it as one game, like, oh, I only play one game. It's like, oh, I play Final Fantasy. Oh, what are you playing tonight? Like, this is the flavor for the evening or for the month. And then that keeps you in the Square Enix ecosystem, and it keeps that off year, like you could have and start to set, like, here's the big updates every 2 years. That is the off year setting from the 14. And so it just has this, I just see that as a what do you put
It
in
would
there?
be a big win. It would be a
I
big win.
wouldn't put in, like a competitor for 14. Like, oh, this is a heavily story driven MMO that that's competing for your time and attention, that plays just the same. Because then you'd be like, why isn't this just a part of 14
Mm-hmm.
with a different paint? But that would be my perspective, Chris. Like, you've shared yours before, but
No, I think that's a good thing. I think seeing the success of WoW Classic and WoW Retail being such different games and having communities that honestly, in some portions of those communities, dislike each other, and other areas where it's this place to escape to from the one game, you primary in one and you secondary in the other.
yeah,
We've seen people ask for 11 and 14 to be under one subscription. I think if this looter ended up being a subscription based game, a games as a service, instead of being a purchase and you buy expansions more like Diablo, I think that it would be interesting to see that be the moment where they move us to a single subscription, one Square Enix subscription that says, hey, and this month you get access to this, or all of our games as a service games are under it. It would be interesting to kind of start to see that move in that direction. At least all the games that are under Yoshi P's division. I understand that within Square Enix as a whole, there's a lot of different licensing and stuff going on. They act as a publishing arm for a lot of people. That doesn't mean they have the rights to lump them under their subscription.
yeah.
But it would be interesting to see them start to kind of move to that more Netflix model. As for like, if the looter shooter has room, well, of course Yoshi P deserves a chance to try. I mean, he's earned his chance to do whatever he wants to do. He's given an immense amount to 14. I think that where the looter fits into the Final Fantasy universe is a really hard thing to do well, and you only get one shot at it. If you come out with it and it fails, people are going to say, I told you so, and I don't know how you come back and say, here's our second try. Like, I don't see that. So I think my concern would be, like, what does that game look like? What are its objectives? What does it play like? And they're big questions, and there isn't an easy answer. It's one of the reasons that in my mind, I would prefer to see what Yoshi P works on, assuming this is what he wants. I would prefer to see more of a rebirth, a 3.0, if you will, of kind of that 2.0 rebirth. Like, 3.0 being like a total redo of 14, and carry us into the next phase. And I think Shadowbringers, in my mind, has proven that they can tell a really good story where it would be logical to have an outcome where the world kind of ends at the end. I don't think it will this time. I think we'll just move on to the next one. But I think that there is, as we look at the lore behind 14, without getting into spoilers here, I think there is a logical conclusion to that storyline where you could send the game into an 11-style maintenance mode, and you could have already overlapped where 16 could start here, and you can let that one finish its last few expansions out, and then you can carry 16 forward, and you can let people port their characters over, or you can pay homage to them, like much like 14 does to the 1.0 characters, either in just brief little text or in credits or whatever. I would love to see 16 be this life breathed into 14, because I'm aware, like, in my mind, I feel that 14 has to end at some point.
Well, yeah, but at the same time, 11's still going on, and it's had its like highs and lows, and
Yeah.
essentially they reached a low population, and then since then they've been just growing and growing and growing as players maybe bounce between 14 and 11, and that's why I think like a unified sub between at least those two games would ultimately benefit both games in terms of population. Like, if anybody's sitting here like, man, I'm frustrated because 5.3 was delayed. Oh, I can go and we can grind it out, and we can go do on, something a little bit different, but still exist within the same Final Fantasy kind of fix.
Yeah.
You have it's just that variety. Like, okay, well, cool. Go play a sandbox, go play in a sandbox and do what you want. And yeah, and if you like it, cool. I think 11 and the fact that it's being remade, and then that they've actually changed the terminology with their relationship with Nexion, and saying we're working in collaboration with them on the remake, not that they're the like they were saying like, hey, Nexion's developing it, Nexion and then over the years when it never continued to come out, and like as things changed, honestly I think Fortnite was a massive eye-opening thing for the industry of saying, yeah, here's your game, put it everywhere, who cares?
Right.
It's like you don't have to sit here and say we're a mobile only game. You can say, hey, how do we make this functionality work? Question then comes down to the monetization policies and strategies. But what I'm getting at is that if 16 ended up being a continuation, whether it's set 1,000 years or 10,000 years or whatever, like it has this kind of conclusion, I think that ultimately helps preserve the beauty of what ARR Heavensward Stormblood is, because the concern is that there are people out there, and that's why we see a WoW Classic came back. If they were going to do something like that, it wouldn't make sense to turn off 14. In fact, you could even still have that say, here's the event that kicked off this, thing. And if you want to pick up this story or whatever this ends up being, you can pick it up in 16. But we're also not going to take away 14, and we'll even add content to it. We'll even expand it, especially with the population that's there. And then all of a sudden you have this global subscription. It's like, you want to go time walk, you want to go see what this is like, you can jump back into 14 itself, you can play through that story, and then you can have some kind of connection with it going forward. And so I think that could be I think personally that could be really exciting. However, there is something to be said by saying, here's a brand new game in a new world, new story, new characters. Yes, it's Final Fantasy 16, but now it's like, whether it's a shared world, it's an open full MMO world, or if it's just a single player, because they could just say like,
because if you don't do this, you're bound to the current battle system, right? You can't delete people's classes. And so if you say, man, I wish we didn't have the healer tank DPS combo that we do, it's really hard to adjust it. I mean, they could make changes to party size, but that's about it. I mean, you can't delete black mages. You can't delete paladins. So without moving to a new game, you have to respect all the constraints you put on yourself, which is why I think that the two things you're naming here, like you saying that you want it to be this looter thing and me saying I want it to be a rebuild of 14, both of them tap into things that Yoshi P has said. He's continually mentioned and labored over the fact that 14 is buried in this spaghetti code that we always call it, right? This just rushed code base of just trying to save a game. There were a lot of corners cut, but he's also said, I want to do other things. And so it's like, with the two options we're naming here are really just tapping into the two things that Yoshi P has said that he wants to do.
And so when we talk about just the technology behind all this, right? When we talk about the engine, we talk, like, he's also commented the overwhelming expense of just upgrading the PS3 assets. The game has PS3 assets, and people were like, man, now that you don't have to support PS3, now, like, you got the next generation of consoles coming out, like, they can finally make this game, like, so beautiful. And I would say 14 is incredibly beautiful, but like, if you're really into that high fidelity and that experience, you're looking at it and saying, oh man, but Yoshi P looks at it and says, just the cost of that alone, like, the budget wise, we would have to say, you're not going to have this now. And we already see that within the game. Like, okay, we're not going to do deep dungeon, but we're going to do trusts. Okay, cool. We're not going to, we're going to change this up and add this content and change this up, because like, they're not running off of this unlimited budget despite its success. They've said, and so with that, it's like, would the player base want more for them to spend that money and get those art assets at ups, or would they say, you know what, might as well just invest that into the thing that starts at a minimum running spec of the next gen? So you're like, hey, the minimum running spec is a PS5, Xbox Series X, PC style. Now, like, check it out. And honestly, if I would be surprised if the future of Final Fantasy games are not built in Unreal. We're already seeing Square Enix. We've been seeing them make that shift to Unreal Engine over the last couple of years.
The first is so much prettier than the source, though. So they've shown the ability that we can make new zones at the new fidelity, and then when you go back, and then it's just about making sure that your new player experience represents the aspect of the game you want, which we're seeing both games heavily alter their new player experience this year. I naturally always kind of reference WoW as the other one in the room, because it's an easy one for me to compare notes between. And the new player experience of an MMO is something that has to be dealt with after years have gone by. So that's an easy time to go back and adjust fidelity. When we got Ocean Fishing, they adjusted the fidelity of Lemza. So like, you can go back and you can say, okay, each time we touch something, let's just, while we're here, let's go ahead and, while I came into the kitchen to get a glass of water, let me go ahead and start the dishwasher. Like, I'm not telling you to clean the whole house. I would love for the whole house to be clean, but that's an immense amount of work. Just do the one thing, and we can get to something else when we move to something else. So
I think what's really, I'm going to hit on one last point from my perspective, is that with 16, with 14, with 11, even like 11 remake or whatever, I think one of the things that really shows is that as long as players are interested, these games aren't going to go away.
Right.
And the idea, and this is like when we look at interviews talking about Final Fantasy XI recently, they said, how long is this game going to go on? And they were like, oh, maybe 5 or 6 years. And here they're coming up on their 20th anniversary. The understanding of the life of these games, we have actual data. We know that players are excited. And if you're not going to do something, the players will like to get a private server and try to do it themselves because they have such a passion for this. So with 14, I honestly think, like, I'm not worried about any form of maintenance mode or anything like that. I think what they were going to look at is that, hey, if the players are at this level, or if we have a global subscription, why can't we continue to release expansion every 2 years for this game until players are just no longer going to be like they just don't want to purchase it? So I think you'll seeing that, hey, how do we design these games for 20 plus years of running life, for this mindset that, hey, we're going to have like all of this different content, and then what challenges does that equal for the new player coming in?
And the new features like the trial change and things like that all pave way to that. Something where you can breathe life into old content, and you can scale it up to current stuff, and you can say, hey, for this limited time you can come in here, you do this, we spun up a new art asset for you to go grab. There's a new piece of loot, or there's a new pet or whatever to grab from this limited time event. And there's this continual draw, especially if it's under a subscription with, maybe all the legacy games are together, or the legacy game and 16 or whatever. I think long term, there are ways that 14 doesn't have to totally go away to give way to this, assuming 16 isn't just a giant expansion. It isn't just instead of working on expansion for 2 years while we've been working on other expansions, 8.0 or whatever has been worked on for 6 years, 7 years, 8 years. And so 8.0 is this huge leap forward. Assuming it's not something like that, 16 could very easily not erase 14, regardless of what kind of game it is. But what kind of games do you guys want?
Yeah, that's a great question. Do you guys want the looter shooter, the action RPG? Do you want the like a turn-based? Because when we look at it, like this Yoshi P's game, whatever, it could actually be 17. A lot of people are like, they could be working on 16. And when I think it was 13 was announced, they also announced 14. Like that's when it kind of, hey, 13's coming. Oh, and by the way, let's talk about Final Fantasy 14 as well. Like sometimes that's just kind of how the timing works. And so they could be like, yep, we're ready to release 16. It's a single player game. And that's going to be funny because it's like, oh, I thought you guys said 16 was going to be an MMO. We're like, we think whatever Yoshi P's working on is going to have that multiplayer. But he could be the director of the next single player game. So do you want it single player? Do you want it multiplayer? Do you want it shared world, or do you want it like a full-on MMO? And then what kind of monetization model do you want to see? Like,
and what happens to 14?
Yeah, and what happens to 14? Personally, I would like to see it have the global subscription, because I think that's the best and most fair for them, because that then justifies they can have the cash shop to sell other things like 14 has, but then you can have more choice with your subscription what to play. And I think the other only option is free to play.
Yep.
And that's where it's like I struggle with that model. A couple games I feel can do it right, but it becomes risky, and it becomes like, okay, how are they going to try to get my money? I'd rather just block off a certain budget, every month, and be like, here's my donation. Thank you. Please continue to make content for me. But that's just my thoughts. What are your thoughts, Chris, on monetization?
No, it depends on the game. I mean, I really am open-minded about monetization. I don't hate free-to-play. I don't hate subscriptions. I don't hate buy-to-play. I think every game is about a relationship between a set of developers and a publisher and the players. Mm-hmm. And so I think as long as you're being respectful of that, and as long as you're setting the proper expectations, I don't mind cash shop items. I don't mind any of that. I don't mind pay to win. As long as the day I download that game, you tell me this is a pay-to-win game. I don't want to get 5,000 hours into 14 and then they offer a pay-to-win option. That deletes the progress that I made on a game that I feel there was an agreement on. So if they want to release a pay-to-win game, it doesn't bother me. I probably won't play it because that's not something I enjoy, but there are people who do. And so like I'm all for gaming as a whole being bigger. More gamers is better. More games is better. More fun being had is better. Bringing more people together is better. So whatever best extends his vision of the game and the community that forms around it, that's the pay model I want them to have, more than it fit into any expectation I have.
Okay.
I do like the idea of a Netflix thing just around Square Enix games in general, and then I just don't know what games go into that pot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it gets complex with obviously Game Pass. Final Fantasy is in Game Pass now, so there's all these different relationships and licenses and more. So, yeah, we'll have to ultimately wait and see. But the question, obviously, to you guys in chat, let us know in the comments below what you're thinking. Man, regardless, I'm excited to play whatever it is they're working on. I hope that whatever it is, though, that it's not going to be like 5 years until it comes out. Like, don't like if it's gonna like, don't even tell me. If the release date's set for 2025. Tell me in 2024.
Let's
like,
just make this video 10 more times, guessing. Yeah. And then they can say, oh yeah, it's here today, right now.
What? And then now it's like, I gotta, for a game that big, I have to at least know 6 months ahead of time so I can block off like, hey, here's the release, guys. I'm, sending the kids to the grandparents. I'm taking off work. Do not call me. It's time for me to enjoy. Anyway, that's just my thoughts. Thanks, Chris. Great topic. I'm really excited to see. Maybe we'll learn about it here in the next couple of weeks when they start showing off, the PS5 stuff and maybe Xbox Series X stuff. Who knows?
All right, guys. Well, thank you guys so much for watching. Let us know in the comments below what you think. My name's Chris.
My name's Brian.
And we'll see you next time.
Take care.